Good afternoon. Thank you for being here today. And I am pleased to introduce you two of the most qualified people in Illinois due to their years of experience working in this field. The theme related to intimate partner violence. Mrs. Teresa Tudor, PAPE Program Administrator for the Illinois Department of Human Services. She has more than 30 years of outstanding experience in this field. And Michelle Maldonado, she is the Executive Director at the Illinois Certified Domestic Violence Professionals. She has many years of experience working with victims of partner abuse, as well as co-facilitating group for abusers. I have the personal privilege of learning much of what I know about PAIP thanks for their mentorship. You may review their bio information in your folders, but I can guess that at least we have about 50 or 60 years of experience combined to give you a 2 hours presentation. Isn't it great?
All right.
Thank you, Teresa, and thank you, Michelle. Okay, today they will inform us about DV counseling for perpetrators, what really is. Our speakers will be sharing their expert opinions about why Partner Abuse Intervention Program, or PAIP, is the right fit. The right fit to intervene with perpetrators of intimate partner violence. These efforts of providing this workshop at different courthouses has the goal of producing a unified criteria and response for all allied professionals. Proper intervention eventually will help individuals to modify their beliefs and behaviors which lead to abuse. They will have a better chance toward making positive changes, ending the abuse. Thank you for your attendance today, honorable judges, assistant state attorneys, public defenders, probation officers, sheriffs and police officers, victims advocates, social workers. All of you, I would say all of us together, we make a comprehensive team of allied professionals. And all of you watching this video presentation, you are also part of this essential team of allied professionals in the judicial system. Any reduction of the abuse manifested in tactics of power and control will benefit the victims, survivors of the abuse, and the judicial system represented today, both criminal and civil, has a pivotal role to play helping survivors of domestic violence by providing proper intervention for perpetrators. With that, I ask you to give your full attention to Teresa and Michelle and help me in welcoming them. Thank you.
Thank you, Thank you for being here, from taking time out of your busy schedule to come and learn with us. I know that although Joel mentioned some of the expertise and experience that we bring you, I also want to take a minute to honor and acknowledge your expertise and your experience and what a difference what you do makes for families that are impacted by domestic violence. Thank you. Let me first start by saying inside your blue folders there is an index card, and I encourage you to use that to write down questions. We've got a full agenda, but not so full that we won't take questions, because if there's something that you came here specifically to get addressed, to answer, we want to make sure that we do that. So we will have a couple opportunities throughout this presentation to stop, acknowledge your questions, answer your questions if we haven't done that already through presentation. So if you'll take those cards when you have a question, write it down, pass it to the end of the row, and then there will be staff that will come around and pick those up and give those to us. Okay. So we'll do that in lieu of having live questions, so we can make sure we get through everything in the amount of time we have allotted. You may wonder about the title of this, The Right Fit. You know, when we were putting this together, actually this was done in another circuit a couple years ago, I oftentimes get asked, as the administrator over the statewide program of partner abuse intervention, you know, when is PAPE the right intervention or the right response, and when it is not? You know, there's times when the best intervention is going to be a mental health referral. There are times when the best intervention is going to be substance abuse treatment. There are times when anger management is the better referral. But when the time is intimate partner violence, then partner abuse intervention programs is the right fit. So you will never hear me disrespect any of those programs because we need them. We need them as our allies because many times when someone comes into our programs, they have other stuff going on, right? When's the last time you dealt with an individual or a family who had only one issue going on? Probably not in a long time. So we rely upon those other systems to help us, but what we bring is very different. And so by the time we wrap up today, I want you to have a really good understanding of the scope of partner abuse intervention programs, which we'll call PAPEs for brevity, and what to know who to refer, what to expect when you refer someone. I encourage you, if you haven't already formed a partnership with PAPE programs in your area, to please do so. See if you can observe a group. See if you can get a copy of their participant contract. See if you can talk about, you know, how to work together, because it is all about relationships. If what you're doing is sending someone away to a program and 6 months later, show me a certificate, odds are it's not going to be successful. And we'll spend some time on that too. As a criminal justice system, how can we respond in a way that increases the likelihood of success? And success is not a certificate. Success is reducing the risk of intimate partner violence, whether it be with the initial victim that brought this to your attention or in subsequent relationships. So that's what the right fit is going to be about. As Rebecca mentioned, Bob is not able to be with us today. We did get a chance to talk with him yesterday, and I know that he was a big part in helping pull this together, and we will miss him. But know that he is also continuing to be a great resource, and you'll see his contact information at the end of the presentation as well. So we have two core areas we're going to focus on today. We're going to look at the PAPE program itself. We'll spend the majority of the time on that. And then we will shift gears and talk about the criminal justice response, using the remedies that are available through an order of protection as kind of a guide. Right fit? Is it PAPE? Is it anger management? Is it mental health? Is it substance abuse? That's what I mean by right fit. The individual getting connected to the right service. The right timing. As they say, timing is everything, right? Oftentimes what happens is, you know, sometimes not just the wheels of justice moving a little slow because of the huge volume, especially here in Cook County. But oftentimes the person doesn't even kind of get in the queue until years and years into abusive behavior. When we can shorten up that timing, it'll have a tremendous impact. We're also going to look at the right dosage. We all would love a 1, 2, 3 magic program, right? I want a diet like that. I want a lifestyle change like that. I want things that are easy to do, but it doesn't exist. And changing people's attitudes and beliefs and behaviors and ways of doing things for years doesn't happen like that. Dosage does make a difference. We're going to look at the right connections, and that certainly involves all of you in whatever role you play, whether it be law enforcement or probation or the state's attorney's office, judges, victim services, social services in general. Us connecting makes the difference. And then the combinations. Most of us can't have 10 different things to do at the same time and expect to be successful in all of them. So if you have to choose between which comes first, do you do PAPE first? Do you do substance abuse treatment first? Do you do mental health? You know, there is a right combination. It doesn't all have to be one at a time, but there's some things that have to come together in order for the things later to be successful. And we'll spend time on that. So that's essentially what we're going to focus on. So Michelle's going to lead us through just starting with make sure we have the same understanding when we talk about domestic violence.
Thank you. All right, so we have a definition up here, and I assume most of you have some knowledge of domestic violence. It's a pattern of abusive behavior, and the goal is power and control of the partner. So we just wanted to start, because we're going to be talking about PAPE, we wanted to start off with the definition first. Whoops. How did I get in that? There we go. Okay, partner abuse intervention. So partner abuse intervention, and you'll hear us say PAPE often. So PAPE stands for Partner Abuse Intervention Programs. These are the services that are provided to those individuals who are using abusive behaviors towards an intimate partner. It's not anger management, it's not couples therapy, and it's not a recovery program. I mean, I remember one time doing group and a guy coming in going, okay, so I'm gonna be sitting in a group, and do I have to stand and say my name, and I'm here for PAPE? No, that's not what it's about. So he had been in a recovery program and thought it was the same model. There are 4 components of PAPE, and the Department of Human Services oversees all the programs in PAPE. And 4 of them, there are 4 requirements that we have to have in each PAPE program. They include your intake and your assessment. So this is when you're determining who's eligible for the program and what other services they might need. Group, which is the accepted modality for each program, and we'll go further into what group looks like later. Service coordination, which is basically the services you're providing. So you're providing the services that you've received from the referral source to the participant in your program. And system collaboration. So system collaboration, all PAPEs are asked to do some community events, working with other systems like yourselves to work against domestic violence. So that could be participating in a family violence coordinating council. That could be doing trainings like this. That could be being on domestic violence committees. Currently in Cook County, there are 31 approved programs. So 31. Only 10 of them receive funding, which then tells you, like, a lot of them don't receive any sort of funding. You know, most programs will charge a fee to participants, but it's typically something pretty small.
And let me clarify a minute. When she talks about 10 that are receiving funding, that's Department of Human Services funding, so that comes through my area. Other programs may receive funding from the county, from other sources, but the 10 come from DHS.
Mm-hmm. Some programs receive what's called indigent funding, so they might get through the county, they might receive some of the sort of that funding as well. So again, we are overseen by the Department of Human Services. We're also under their administrative code. And what it requires is that you follow all of these principles. The first one says safety and accountability. What that really means is victim safety and abuser accountability. So every decision that is made in a PAPE program must have this in mind. And again, we put that victim safety first because we want to make sure that everything we do is not going to jeopardize the safety of a victim. Intimate partner violence. This shows kind of like the narrow scope of these groups. It is not generalized violence. This is focused on intimate partner violence. It doesn't mean that we could potentially in a PAPE program get a referral for someone who may have committed domestic battery with a family member. They get ordered to come to our program. We then do an assessment and find out that there's been some intimate partner violence in their history. That sort of person would be accepted into the program. Abuse is never condoned, so never ever. Throughout the 26 weeks of our program, we do not condone any abuse whatsoever. And in the same token, PAPE programs must also believe that everyone in this group can change. If we don't think that those participants can change, how can we become those agents of change? We're there to support their change, hold them accountable, and hopefully after the 26 weeks, they can choose to make some change. It's not a magic wand. It's not the 1, 2, 3 program that we can do. It's all up to the individual participant. Attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors. So that's our focus. So our focus is going to be on those attitudes and beliefs that have been formulated over years, which support the abusive behavior. And for a lot of them, it's worked. It's worked for them. So if you think about a 24 to 26 week program, not only are we identifying abusive behaviors, We're challenging those abusive behaviors, holding them accountable for abusive behaviors, and then also giving them tools so that they can make better decisions in the future. And PAPE is not in the business of saving relationships. This is not a group about keeping that relationship together. The PAPEs are there to work with the participant so that they can make different decisions to be non-abusive in the future.
And in fact, it's not unusual for the relationship to have ended by the time someone enters PAPE. And sometimes that, that may be the best choice for the victim, but it can make it complicated in some ways for the perpetrator, because what I hear oftentimes is oh, it was because of that person and I haven't been around, them for X amount of time, or so much time has gone by that it seems like, well, that was how I used to be, so, I'm a different person now. But again, as Michelle said, it's not about saving relationships, because that may not be the safest thing or the best choice for the individuals. A little bit on vocabulary before I go further. When we talk about victim, oftentimes a person may choose to refer to themselves as a survivor instead of a victim. Or they may choose to, of course, in the criminal justice system, your victim is a much more used term because they are a victim of a crime, right? So, victims can be males, they can be females, they can cross every socioeconomic boundary or line there is. There are victims that are children that have witnessed. There's victims that have experienced emotional abuse and not physical. There's victims that have been hospitalized because of physical abuse. Some are females, some are males. Statistics tell us that it's more likely to be a female, overwhelmingly so. Although we can talk about some groups where that's not quite such a difference. For example, people with disabilities. If you have a caregiver that is taking care of everyday needs, the likelihood that a person with a disability, male or female, that will experience violence at the hands of others is way higher than a person without a disability. True for males, true for females. But overall, generally speaking, because of the differences that we see in stats, you're going to hear Michelle and I refer to victims as females and abusers as males. We have female and male groups, separate groups, but we have both, because we don't condone violence no matter whether it's a male or female doing it, no matter what the reason is behind it. So just want to share that a little bit. And when we talk about abuser, I know that sounds like such a label. What we're talking about is someone who has used violence against an intimate partner. They're not monsters. They're not awful people. They've made some terrible choices, probably for the reasons Michelle went over. A lifetime of experiences. Many of them have grown up and witnessed violence themselves. That does not make it okay, but it makes it understandable. So what that means is we have people coming into our groups that, in addition to being a human being who has used violence against someone they probably said they love, they walk through those doors with trauma themselves. They have experienced stuff, and we want to respond to them in a humane manner as well. PAPE is not to be punishment. If I go into a group as I do site visits and observe, and if I see a co-facilitator being disrespectful to one of the participants, that's not okay. And in fact, if we want to change behavior, we have to be role models ourselves, which is one of the reasons why the best case scenario is when you have a male and female co-facilitating, but it is not required by the administrative code. Sometimes that's a myth that's out there. Best practice, but not a requirement. Some areas of the state it would be almost impossible to have a male and female co-facilitating, because females are overwhelmingly in social services in pockets. So, so again, it is to facilitate change, not as a punishment.
Can I add to that?
Absolutely.
So also in group, so you'll hear us say abusers a lot. We don't even use that terminology in group. So someone comes to your program, we're not going to say, okay, you abuser 1, you abuser 2, no. We are using your name We're going to show respect to you just like we expect respect in the group. And again, that's the modeling. That's also because oftentimes I think they don't know what to expect when they come to our program. For a lot of them, it's a pretty scary process. Like, where am I going? Are they going to be screaming at me? Is this going to be a group where it's telling me how horrible I am? No, it's not. So we're going to be respectful to you, but we're also going to hold you accountable for your behavior. So we will call you out on it, but in a respectful way. But I know today when we talk about abusers, we use that term, but it's not a label that we use in the program. Because if I want someone to change, labeling them and make them feel less than, what am I doing? I'm doing the same thing they might be doing with their partner. So I'm not helping the process at all.
Yeah, we're pretty adamant about using respectful language, and so if we hear things like victim blaming or we hear derogatory terms being used, now many groups will not allow a group member to refer to their partner or ex-partner by full name, and that's for the victim's anonymity. Or in some cases, we end up with where two people have had a relationship with the same person, they end up in the same group. And when names are exchanged, then that's where it comes to a head. So there's lots of reasons behind the, again, the focus is on the individuals in group. But who's eligible for group? We're going to spend some time talking about that. We're going to talk about, who can benefit. Because if you can't benefit from PAPE and you put somebody in the group, that is punishment for the facilitators as well as the other group members and the individual. So that's why we do an assessment to make sure that indeed the person we deem able to benefit from the group. Sometimes we don't find that out until later that it isn't a good fit. Maybe they've been to 5 groups, 6 groups, and like, whoa, this is just not working. So you might get a different response down the road. But part of the job is doing it at the very beginning with intake. Who is excluded from the group and why? I think it's important for you to know that, although Michelle gave a wonderful example about how someone may not on the surface fit intimate partner violence, primary aggressor, but when you peel back and you do an assessment, you see that, yeah, maybe the initial abuse was a 50-year-old dad who had a 30-year-old son living in the basement after a divorce, and they've done enough, right? And so there was a domestic battery. That doesn't fit the scope of intimate partner violence. But if they were referred and the PAPE program did an assessment and say, okay, this is not the only violent relationship going on in this household or with this individual, and we see that they were also abusive towards a spouse, a live-in partner, etc., then they would be eligible in that case. And then we'll talk about other interventions that come in. So, although the Illinois Domestic Violence Act, IDVA, covers a wide range of relationships, therefore a domestic battery in Illinois has a wide range of relationships. Not all of them are eligible for PAPE as an intervention. All of them ought to have some type of intervention, whether it be anger management, general counseling, mental health counseling, what have you. But for PAPE, our focus is much more narrow. So to refer someone to a program where they don't meet the scope is really a waste of your time, whether you be the courts, whether you be probation, whether you be child welfare, etc. And it's also a waste of time for the program staff. So we want to make sure that we have the right relationship after intake. Okay. So, what's that criteria? I mentioned intimate partner violence. So it isn't siblings, it isn't roommates, it isn't parent-child, it isn't any of those relationships. It is an intimate partner. Now, intimate does not necessarily equal a sexual relationship. Okay? So we don't exclude someone for that reason. Intimacy is just about the framework of that relationship. Okay. So again, if you did that referral and the person didn't meet that criteria, their violence was in a different relationship, the PAPE program is not likely to say, nope, won't talk to that person. They'll say, let me do an assessment and see if there's anything else there, and then make a recommendation.
Can I say something about assessments are pretty thorough. This isn't something where they just come in and say, this is my situation, take me or don't take me. They're extremely thorough. Not only are we looking at the violence they may have committed, but we're also looking at other services they might need. So it's a huge array of questions that don't just get to physical violence even. So it might get to other types of violence that maybe they don't even realize are abusive behavior. Because honestly, a lot of times when I would see participants come into the program, the only one they identified with was physical violence. And usually it was the one they were arrested for, but oftentimes they may have committed other types of abuse as well. And
Yes.
a lot of that is flushed out in that intake assessment. Not to mention, when you assess at the beginning, you're assessing throughout the entire program. You know, if I had to go into one of those programs and I don't know you and I'm coming for an assessment, I'm going to see Teresa, do you think I'm gonna be, here, Teresa, here's my whole life? No, that's not gonna probably happen. I'm gonna have some walls
Trust me, I'm from the government.
Yeah, exactly. That makes it worse. I might give you a little, but I might not give you a lot. And sometimes a lot of those details come out as we build the relationship with them. So this is kind of the starting point. And usually an intake would be like, here's my intake folder, so I'm ready to do that intake. I wouldn't even open it. I would say, go ahead and sit down, shake their hand. Again, I don't know that they always expect that to happen. And just say, why don't you tell me what happened? We have these questions to get to, and I'm gonna get to them, but let's just talk about what happened and start there. And honestly, you get a lot from that initial conversation. So I just wanted to point out that like intake is pretty thorough, but it is ongoing through the entire course of the program.
And part of that is determining whether the person in front of me is the primary aggressor. I know for law enforcement, it can be difficult when you arrive on a scene and both parties have engaged in physical violence and sorting through who did what. And we'll talk about context of violence in just a little bit. But sometimes you will have two people who have used violence. That includes a victim who has used violence as well as the abuser that has used violence. Okay? Now, I'm not about to step into or out of my role and tell you what ought to happen in terms of who's guilty of a crime. That's not my expertise. So if we get a victim who has used violence at a PAPE program, and we come up with that after doing an assessment, not just because someone shows up and says, I'm a victim, but we do the same thorough assessment. And if we see that as a victim, yes, the victim used violence, but they are not the primary aggressor. PAPE is not going to be helpful, and in fact, it can be very harmful. I once went out on a site visit where it was for a women's group, and I was watching the PAPE group, and there were some things that were coming out in that it just didn't ring true to me that it was all primary aggressors in the group. And so after group, went outside, and then immediately after, there was a victims group, and some of those individuals went straight into the victims group. Now think about that person getting mixed messages. You're in PAPE saying, you're accountable for your behavior. It doesn't matter what anyone else did. You have to own up to your choices, to your actions. 15 minutes later, there is nothing that you could have done that would have created, a reason for someone to be able to hurt you. Mixed messages, to say the least, right? That group, that agency didn't do a very good job of screening out. So of course, I had a conversation with them saying, we don't do that. That is not allowable. And the response was, but they were going to get in trouble with the courts if they didn't complete this program. And we thought it was better that we at least make them compliant so they can go back and not have further consequences because it was on their court order. I'm like, oh no, that is not the way to solve that disconnect with a referral. The way to solve it is to do the assessment, and you've come up with it being the victim who has used violence. Now there may still be consequences, but PAPE is not the intervention. And so you sit down and you have that conversation with the criminal justice system, say why this isn't a good fit. And then maybe other options are offered. But it should never be where someone is in victim services and PAPE programming. You cannot be both. You cannot be the primary aggressor. I'm talking at the same time. Now down the road, could it shift? That's possible. That's why we always do assessments. We know that, and Michelle talked about this, that many times what brings somebody into the group is physical violence. Well, of course, that's what the crime is. If I think bad things about you, I don't get arrested. Even if I say things bad about you, I'm not likely to have a consequence for that. Although those are the things that typically are used long before the physical violence happens. That's the stuff that happened at the very beginning, right after charming ended. That's what you're going to wear when we go out tonight? Makes you look a little, okay. That's where it starts. It does not start with we go out for a nice dinner, first date, and my face gets slapped. There won't be a date number 2, right? So there's a intentionality behind that. Building the relationship. For those of you that have teenagers, if one of those, well, it doesn't have to be teenagers, it can be really any age, but I think most about teenagers, that they go from that, 0 to 60 like that, they're in love after, no time at all, moving in together after no time at all. Those are things that will set your radar off of going danger, danger, danger. But there's a whole range of tactics, which is one of the reasons why the order of protection has so many diverse remedies. So it addresses the emotional abuse, it addresses the economic abuse, it addresses the physical abuse, the sexual abuse, all of those things. Because what I do know about abusers is they know what works, and they use what works. When people ask, well, why do they keep doing it? Because they can, because it gets them what they want, and whether that is to get their partner to stop doing something or to start doing something. If it's successful, so let's think about it. If the tactic I use is a really, one of those stares that tells you, you better or else, then why lift my hand when I can do it with the look? But if the look doesn't work, I'm going to try something else. And that's my repertoire of tactics. Very intentional, goal-oriented, strategic. They know what they're doing. And I'm emphasizing that because we get a lot of individuals who come into group, as well as those that refer, and certainly community at large, with the they lost it. And Michelle is going to talk about anger management. And when she does, I want you to remember intentional, strategic, methodical, goal-oriented. And you'll see where anger management is not a good fit for someone who chooses to use violence against a partner. So in that intake that Michelle talked about, which is a thorough assessment, so we're talking about the precipitating incident or what brought them to our program, but we're also talking about the history. Let's think about that. If we had where both people used violence, the precipitating incident may not really tell me a whole lot. I've got to peel it back and look at that pattern that Michelle talked about, a pattern of behavior. We don't see people after one incident. Doesn't happen. Odds are physical violence wasn't the first use of power. It's likely it wasn't the first time they got caught with physical violence, and it certainly is not reflective of the whole relationship. It would be like me saying, yep, that time I got a speeding ticket, that is the only time in my life I have ever gone over the speeding limit. Y'all believe that?
No.
Well, you're right to not believe me on that. So we have to look at the history. We have to look at the pattern. And the other reason we have to look at it is we are responsible for assessing risk. And remember that person that I told you about? They didn't come right away. They came 10 months after. So they're not even in that relationship anymore. We want to go back even the relationship before that, because we want to make sure that current as well as previous victims are safe. Especially previous victims if there is a child in common. Boy, that ramps up the likelihood of risk. So we check to see, do they fit the scope of the program? Will they benefit from the program? Give you an example of someone that, probably the most common example, one of which in the last week I received a question from one of my partner abuse programs. They had an individual who had a traumatic brain injury. They did an assessment. Met the scope, definitely. Primary aggressor of an intimate partner relationship. So check off number 1. Got to whether the individual could benefit and talked about their concerns with placing this individual in group. Just the dynamics of group being overwhelming, overstimulating, that they had concerns about that. And then they had concerns whether the person could really process and understand what was happening. So to put that individual in group, they could be there 5 years and maybe not get anything out of it. So what would be the point? So that might be an example where we say, yep, they meet the scope, but we don't think PAPE is going to work, and here's why. You know, and you should be asking those questions. If you make the referrals and someone is not accepted into the program, you can ask, well, why not? You know, because otherwise you won't know what to do with them, right? If that doesn't work, then what's my next thing? Maybe the response is, well, you know what? They came to the assessment under the influence. You know, I had them in 2 groups. Both times showed up high or nodding off in group. Well, what's the point in continuing group? They need to address that. Get stable enough that they can come to group so they could benefit from it. Then the other piece of that, and this was something that was actually added to the administrative code, this benefit piece in 2014. And the reason it was added was because of the sometimes tense dynamics between the criminal justice system and PAPE programs. I'm just going to say it like it is, okay? And so you have the court that's saying, you know, I want this intervention because this is this is what I know is supposed to happen, right? We've learned that partner abuse intervention programs is the best fit. It's the right fit for intimate partner violence. And then if a PAPE program rejected the referral and said, no, John's not eligible for this group, then it's like, well, no, it's on the court order. You have to do this. So I added this to the administrative code so there would be a thoughtful criteria. So individual benefit was one of them, because I had seen that person with TBI put in a group and they're discharged after their butt's been in a chair for 24 weeks, but they haven't gained anything, okay? So individual benefit was added for that. The other piece of that was group benefit. Now, that's not to say that we're not used to handling our challenging folks, and we don't dismiss someone out of group just because they objected to something or they didn't participate or whatever. Trust me, my experience with all of our programs, all 75 of them across the state, is that they're more likely to give someone a second chance, a third chance, a fourth chance before they say, it's not working. But you know, I was in a group that stood out to me. And this individual had been in the program for 13 weeks, so halfway through the program, or more than halfway, depending on if it's a 24 or 26 program. And the facilitators had talked to me before group started, and they were torn. One of them said, you know, if we just tried a couple more things, maybe we could get to him. And the other one's like, we tried everything, you know, he's bringing group down. Didn't give me a name. So we started the group off, and they did a check-in, which oftentimes happens with group. People go around and not only share their name, some might share what brought them to the group, might talk about how their week went, you know, all of that. And it was very clear to me, just through that introduction, who they were talking about. And when this gentleman was speaking, I could watch the rest of the group. There were those folks in group that when this person started talking, oh, great, Charlie's going to take up the whole group. Facilitators are going to go after them. I won't have to talk, right? And then the other ones that were like this. Oh, yeah. I mean, almost literally rolling eyes and turning their back. So what did we do to the rest of the group? For one individual, we're basically ruining it for the rest. That's a hard call to make. Because maybe Charlie's the most dangerous, the most that we're concerned about. It's not easy to come to the conclusion we need to cut this person loose because the group is hurting. And oftentimes you don't know that in an assessment. I mean, the group dynamics haven't played in yet, okay? So don't be surprised if someone is accepted into the program and later you're told we had to discharge them and here's why, okay?
And also I want to add to that too. Those decisions aren't made without thought, like meaning, so say you have this person that's, because I've seen that person in group, and who monopolizes the group. Facilitators attempt to kind of nix that in group, it's not working, They meet with the person individually outside a group. Say, hey, we want you to be here. We're working for you to be here. However, this is what we see. And something about this needs to change because there's 15 people in this group and we all want an opportunity. Now, like you said, some of them don't want an opportunity and they would love to stay hidden. They don't want to ever have to say anything. Don't look at me. Look at this guy. Keep him talking.
Yeah.
Now, if you've made all those attempts, you meet as a staff, you may talk to the referral source and say, this is what's going on. Do you have any ideas? You're meeting with him too. Is there anything we can do? And if nothing comes up and this person continues that same behavior, then that's when something else needs to happen. So I just wanted to emphasize that it's done really thoughtfully. It's not just like, because there might be participants who you go, I just really don't like that guy. There's something about him, just really don't like him, right? So I may tell my facilitator, when he talks, you might have to intervene. I'm not sure what, because I'm human, so I'm not sure how I'm going to react to this. Could you maybe take that answer or whatever? But that person, if they're participating, and because there are some who do want to be there, they might not outright say it, but after a while, they actually like coming to group. I'm not going to keep someone in group who's making it harder for these people to learn. They want to change, and 24 to 26 weeks sounds like a long time. It's not. These groups are an hour and a half to 2 hours long with a curriculum, check-in. There's a lot of things that goes on quickly. So that would be a case where we would have to terminate somebody, but it's not without thought.
Right. And oftentimes, as you see up here about participant contracts, there's a generic participant contract, and that's the transparency. This is what's expected from every participant, and this is what you can expect from the agency or the program. Okay? And so it's very clear. So no one should use a contract as a gotcha exercise. I should know that, oh, I missed and now I'm kicked out because I had 3 fails, in terms of attendance. That should have been something I was told before I ever stepped foot in group. Okay? Now, as a state, we don't dictate what those participant contracts in detail ought to look like, although the administrative code says you need to address attendance, you need to address participation, you need to talk about confidentiality, you need to, all of those types of things. But we don't tell them 3 misses and you're out. Everyone's kicked out after 3 weeks. We don't say you should have an excuse and an unexcused. Sometimes I will encourage, actually, programs not to do that because what's the point? Or I'll ask them, think about why you set your attendance policy the way that you do. If it's done because, well, they can't benefit if they're not in group, it really doesn't matter whether excused or not excused, right? I'm not there. And so we do a whole lot of chasing documents, doctor's note, employer note, all those types of things when it really doesn't matter. That's not to say that life doesn't happen. Someone can't make it. A common one we run into that's really difficult, mandatory overtime. We want our folks employed. We know the risk of another incident if someone suddenly loses their job is very high, so we want them to keep their job. So are we going to enforce that? Would we put them on a suspension? Like, we're going to put you on hold. Good example. Had it where somebody had a heart attack, and they'd already completed like more than half of the program. They were going to miss more than the allotted time. So I suggested to the program that they have a suspension policy. Doesn't count for or against them. They don't have to restart. But once they are released health-wise to attend, then they get reactivated. So there's all sorts of creative ways. So if you're struggling with the way the attendance and things like that, homework, et cetera, that are happening with the program you partner with, talk about that. They should value your feedback because you have another piece.
You should be able to contact that PAPE program and say, why do you do this? Why do you have this? What happens when this happens? You should be able to call that program and ask those questions, and they should be totally fine with it. It should be pretty transparent, because if we're transparent with the participants, we should also be transparent with the systems that we work with. Up front, we tell them, here are the expectations, here are the consequences if you don't meet them. And there are certain circumstances where you will meet individually with the participant to discuss a special circumstance that might change things like you mentioned, but you must also be consistent with the consequences you put in place. For example, being late to group. Group starts at, I mean, I've worked at various programs. So one was group started at 10 o'clock. You have until 10:05. So one guy shows up and he said, you know, I'm just sorry, the traffic was horrible. It's like 10:10, can I come in? Oh, okay, I feel so bad for you because I had to go through traffic too. I let him in. Guess who's watching that? Every single guy in that group. So then next week somebody else comes in and it's 10:01 and I say, hey, you weren't here at 10 or 10:06. You weren't here at 10:05. Now I've been inconsistent. So that has to be really consistent with the consequences we put in place, but they're all very well informed. Like the more information they have, the better. And it can't just be a one-time, hey, because intake is pretty in-depth. So some programs will do orientation. So they do an intake, then they orient you to the group. This is what's expected in group. These are remember some of the things we talked about in intake. This is what this is gonna look like. And then when that comes up, you may have to execute those consequences. And sometimes facilitators have a hard time with it, but we have to be, that's accountability. So we have to be holding them accountable for everything. So that's just, I mean, time is just one example.
And that's an example of when being transparent with the rest of the group can be very helpful. In some parts of Illinois, there is one group per week. That's all the agency offers. And if somebody works until 5:30 and group starts at 5:30, they will never ever be able to be on group on time. And they cannot get released from their employer. So they might make the decision, so-and-so, because of these circumstances, gets to come at group at such and such time. But they would share that with the best practice would be they would share that with the rest of the group. So we're not bending the rules. What we're saying is we've got a circumstance that can't be solved other than allowing this participant come 10 minutes later, whatever it is, okay? So identifying needs, it is mandatory in assessment that all PAPE programs screen for substance use and for mental illness. I'm not talking about a huge clinical in-depth testing. Screening is the key word. And the reason for that is I just need to know enough whether I ought to refer to the substance abuse agency down the street or the mental health facility across town so they can do a thorough assessment. But there's something that's coming up that I just need to check out some more. So everybody gets that, regardless of what you put on a court order, regardless of what information you share. It's a mandatory part of the intake process. It's something I'm going to be looking at when I do site visits, when a program applies. I'm going to look at their assessment. I want to make sure they're screening for that. So we talked about some of the exclusionary criteria. So Michelle mentioned if someone is generally violent. In other words, you know, we see that they have been violent towards their neighbor, they're in bar fights, they're in gang fights, they're in blah, blah, blah. That's not intimate partner violence, okay? That's not who we're designed to help. All of our activities, all our discussions are gonna be like, that's not applicable to me. Now, it's not to say that they've never, ever committed an act of violence towards someone else. Again, we're talking about where is the primary, where is the focus. The other part of that, is really to make sure that it doesn't distract from the other discussions. You know, if what I'm doing is coming into group and I'm focusing about my, you know, lifelong feud with my neighbor or how my boss gets on my nerves, when are we going to get to the intimate partner relationships and skill building around that? Okay. The precipitating incident, it is only one part of the assessment. Never in and of itself is it the reason for going into PAPE. We're looking at a lifetime of relationships. We're looking at those patterns. We're looking at why is it used? What are they trying to gain? So it's like a balance between those two. An intake screening process or an intake assessment has to look at precipitating, and so we need you for that. We need, if you have a police report, we need if you have done any assessment on your end to share that with us. Because as Michelle said, when the person comes into us, they don't want to tell us anything. You know, she fell down the stairs. Right? All right, if we don't see that, then we're going to refer out. I'm going to add to that too. So here's an example of more often than not, well, not more often than not, but would happen. So you'd have a participant come, you're doing an intake assessment, they say, they just sent me here, I don't know why. I wasn't abusive, she fell down the stairs. And so we're like, okay, well, you've told me that, so let's start going through the assessment. And a lot of the assessment will be how many times have you yelled and screamed at her? And then you have to answer like 0, 1, 2, whatever. And different forms of abusive behavior that they might not be thinking are abusive.
But some will just go 0, 0, 0, the big zero, just one big circle. Here you go. No, I don't know why I'm here. They just sent me here. I don't know what to do. Okay, well, this program is about making change. So at this point of our intake assessment, I can't accept you because I'm not sure what you're going to work on while you're in the program. So I'm going to contact the referral source. You can go back and talk to your referral source, and then we'll figure this out. Oftentimes, I would then call up, probation and say, this is what happened in the intake assessment, and we can't accept this person at this point. You have a relationship with them? Can you talk to them? Sometimes what would happen is you get a call again. Well, I forgot that, and then they would, admit to some abusive behavior. So then we would allow them into the group. But again, it's that whole either denial, resistance. I don't want to be in this program. I don't want to be identified as someone that's in this program. But we can't accept somebody and work with somebody if they're not admitting to any abusive behavior.
Right. And remember, it's not just physical. I would absolutely love if we had a flood of folks knock through on our doors saying, I've cussed my partner out. It's the only thing I've ever done. Can I come to group? I don't suspect that's going to happen, right? It's the physical that gets the attention of everybody, including the individual themselves many times, especially if it was witnessed by children. So if they refuse to give information about the precipitating incident, and sometimes that happens because someone comes before their court case is settled, so they don't want to give any information about what's going to go to court. But that's very different than saying, well, let's talk about other things that have happened besides this one incident. And that helps them. If we focus, what we've learned is if we focus on the precipitating incident, then they put all their focus on saying why it didn't happen the way they said it did, or why the courts were wrong, or the cops were wrong, or the blah, blah, blah. And it's like, that doesn't matter. That's not why you're here. And I'm not going to argue of what was fair and unfair and who's to blame and who's not. The reason you're accepted into the program is I see where, that your partner, you expect your partner to get permission from you in order to do this, this, and that. When I asked you about, describe to me how decisions are made in your relationship, and everything you responded to that was about you were in control, that you did not get input from your partner. That's what got you here. Whether or not she fell down the stairs or not is irrelevant at this point to criteria for getting in. And then it's like, oh. So then they get open to learning. If we get in that tug of war, that power struggle over that incident, we'll lose.
It never works.
Yeah.
It never works.
So let's say you have the same scenario that happens. How do you decide whether I've got primary aggressor or whether I've got a victim who's used violence? That one that has done a preemptive strike because they're fearful. If I knock him out, then I can get away safely. Or I know what happens next. We've been down this road before. I got to do something to protect myself. How do we know? So let me give you a quick example. Kind of spells it out. So somebody comes home, walks into the bedroom, and their partner is in bed with someone else, okay? So let's put some context around that. I am aware that my partner has been having affairs, flaunts them, says that, I can do this, you can't do that. I am aware that the partner is scared to death of the other person. I am aware that this is one of many different things that have been going on in the relationship. All those different tactics have been used. But what I see in the police report is about person walks through the door, sees this, and somebody gets hurt. Now let's put a little different context in this. I walk through the door, same scenario. I am shocked. That person in bed with my partner is my best friend. And I react badly. And I hurt him. But if you ask my partner, If you assess me, there's absolutely no pattern of power control. There's absolutely no indicators that I have been abusive in this relationship or any other relationship. Do we have a domestic battery? Yeah. I mean, we have a crime that was committed. So both people could be referred to PAPE. But I'll tell you, one ought to get it in the program and the other one shouldn't. And so that's why you have to look at the context. We have to look at the context before determining someone's eligible. Oftentimes it's coming a simple question like, who's afraid of whom? That will tell you a lot. And not just because of physical size, but because of that controlling behavior. So same scenario could end up with one person accepted into the program, the other one saying, no, they're not eligible. They don't meet the criteria. As I mentioned, risk assessment is so important because, as I said, this is not the first rodeo the person has been on by the time they come to our program. And so we've got to look at past pattern to see, is it escalating? Is it more intense? Is the tactics becoming more lethal, leaning towards that? Does it look like the person is like, you're my core, the centrality of it? That's where your murder homicides come in. If I can't have you, no one else can. Okay? I cannot envision my life without you. That is a dangerous situation. We're looking at whether substance use is in there, not because substance use causes intimate partner violence, but it can impact a person's ability to be aware of their actions, like how it's like child abuse. Okay, if I'm under the if I use an instrument to spank my child instead of my hand, with my hand I can feel it. I have a good barometer as to how much force is being used. You pick up something else and use it, I don't care if the wooden spoon or whatever, you can't tell. And the risk of harm is greater. Kind of happens with substance abuse that way. Strangulation, stalking, and intimate partner sexual violence are asterisk because they are huge. They should be red, neon, blinking lights. If these come across, you are looking at a potentially deadly situation. So we have to monitor that very closely together.
And PAPE programs have to be very cognizant of even hearing about strangulation because it's not called that in group. They're going to say, I choked her or I put my hands on her. They're going to minimize it, right? So sometimes what PAPE programs will do, and this is all in kind of the accountability realm, is to say, okay, so say that sentence again and use the word strangle. And it's very difficult for many of them. And you'll ask them, why does that feel so difficult?
Right.
Well, because that's life-threatening. I wasn't trying to kill her. Well, you almost did. And we need to call it what it is. So it's really like changing the whole language of what it is, changes the context, changes the meaning, changes the severity and the risk.
I have never known that there were so many adult couples that wrestled until I came into PAPE programs. Just saying. I mean, the names that are used, I'm like, seriously? I've been married 35 years. I know my husband and I have never wrestled. We've not wrestled with our kids. We've not wrestled with each other. I'm not sure where that comes from. But it oftentimes is used as a way of minimizing what happened. Okay. We talked about this already. And just underscoring, if it's a victim who has used violence or a victim that is sent to us, we refer out. So connections with area victim service programs is a requirement for PAPE programs. When someone sends in an application, we require that they reach out to victim services. If for whatever reason the victim service agency is unable or unwilling to connect, then we do have to release the PAPE from that responsibility. But they are expected to be the ones that reach out.
And that relationship doesn't just mean I call up the victim service program and say, hey, can you just give me this stamp of approval?
Right.
No, I mean,
No.
It means a lot more than that. It means developing the relationship. It could be cross-training. It could, the victim service program might want to come watch a group. I mean, oftentimes, I worked in a program that had both victim service and perpetrator group, and I worked in the perpetrator group, but I often worked with people in victim service. And they had no idea what was going on in groups. They thought, you know, there's yelling and screaming and chairs getting thrown and you gotta have security. It's not like that at all. So one of the things that we implemented was we had every new staff person, and actually it ended up being all staff people, come and observe each kind of program in the agency, and they came and they watched a group. Now we informed the participants ahead of time, so that's also another thing about it. I'm not just bringing a bunch of people to watch you. It would be one person coming and observing, and they would all have to be okay with it because again, you know, we're respecting them. But they would be shocked at some of the things that would happen. So it is more than just like, got to try and have this relationship with you. Can you just give us a letter?
Right.
And, you know, so.
The administrative code spells out some ideas of things that could be a part of that relationship, but it does not dictate, because every community is different.
Yep.
You know, in one area of the state, we have one victim service agency and 5 PAPE providers. There is no way that victim service agency can meet with them on a monthly basis with every single one of those. So what they've done is created kind of like a quarterly meeting for everybody, and actually the courts are a part of that as well. You know, so it's just, you know, it's the intent behind it. We don't dictate what it has to look like.
But they still could also, in that situation, they would kind of know what that PAPE's doing, and then they could get information from the victim service. It's still very valuable.
Right. Yep.
Family Coordinating
Yep.
Council.
It is required by the administrative code that groups are observed every 6 months, so that way you get that neutral feedback. That's one of the best things that I love about going out and doing site visits. It's a chance to sit in group and a chance to give the facilitators feedback. Because many times the facilitators are really a very small part of the whole agency, so they don't get very many people coming into their groups that say things like, you know, when that person said that and you responded like that, that was awesome. I mean, you know, the way that you came back, very respectful, the way that you know, had him think through his choices at the time, or you talked with him, you know, to help him to see what he was thinking that led him to go to that. That's great. And sometimes they'll be like, doesn't everybody do that? I'm like, no, that was really good what you did. And then sometimes they say, well, you know, I kind of noticed when you did this that, you know, I was thinking I might have tried this, and give them some suggestions on what to do. So there's both, but group observation is definitely important. That's why we have it in the code. So the timing thing I spoke about before, so I'm not going to spend much time on this, but basically it's the sooner we can put things together and start the intervention, the better. Sometimes it can be 18 months later. You know, for parts of the state where probation is 18 months, guess who shows up at month 17? Right? So they've had all that time to say, I didn't do nothing. You know, I'm on to another person. My new person is wonderful.
And things
it's
are
that
great.
old one.
Things are great in my new relationship.
Yeah. You know, I always equivalent this to, you know, if any of you have a new puppy, you know, and you leave out the door in the morning, and let's say they're not crated, you know, and so you come home, and so as soon as you leave, they're all excited, and within 30 minutes they have an accident. And so you come home 8 hours later or more, and you see what they've left for you, and it's like, and you bring the puppy over, and you put their nose down, you point, and they're like, what? You know, what did I do? Don't you love me? You know, that happened so long ago, they can't relate. You know, if you'd been able to catch them when they were in the middle and bring them outside and start that's how we do training, right? Well, not to compare dogs to our group members, but it's much the same. You know, when I get consequences more swiftly, more certainly, better timing. One of the things I've been recommending lately to our partner abuse programs has been, with your attendance policy, I encourage you to have no misses, unless we're talking about really big emergencies, no misses within the first 6 weeks. Why? If they get that connection and they go 3 weeks in a row, 4 weeks in a row, they are more likely to complete the program. If they come to one group, miss the next 2, do another, I guarantee you the facilitators will be working harder than the participants, and they're likely not to finish. So having that 6 weeks up front, no absences, again, short of emergency, is a good way to help with the timing. So that's what we're looking at. And if there's non-compliance, you know, I hope that if you're a mandatory referral source, somebody misses one time, you know it. And you don't know it 6 weeks later, you know it then. And the reason the program shares that with you is because you'll do something about it. we'll have a joint session together, or you'll have a, conversation next time they come in for a probation meeting, or you'll, do a home visit. Whatever is within your realm of things to do.
No, I'm not great with this clicker, but go ahead and give it to me. All right, so dosage. So right here, no shortcuts to changing attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors. These programs are 24 to 26 weeks long for a reason. So again, like I said before, we're talking about years and years of choices they've made to be abusive, supported by the attitudes and beliefs. So for us to go in, it's kind of like scratching the surface almost after 26 weeks. The first, I don't know, and I can't put a number on it, but the first few weeks, 6 weeks, you might have somebody just like this. I'm just going to listen to what they say. I don't want to be here. It's obvious I don't want to be here. Not sure why I need to be here, but I'm here. I'm sitting in this seat. Well, group isn't really like that. Like, again, informed at the beginning. This is a group. You can't just come and sit. We're going to be interactive. You're not just going to sit here and talk. My facilitator used to be Bob or Joel. You're not going to sit for 2 hours and listen to us talk, because you'd fall asleep, you'd get bored. You're not listening. It's going to be real interactive. And again, for some of them, they're like, what does that mean? I'm a little scared. What do I have to reveal? And again, I will answer any questions you have. We will kind of, take it easily as we can. But you are kind of required, because unless I hear from you, I don't know what those attitudes and beliefs are. So then we can't address it, because they're all individualized. So not everybody's the same in this group. Not to mention, groups are, and I don't know how it is now, but the groups that I worked in were open-ended. So what that meant was, guy would start at group 1, 6 weeks later, another guy would start at 6 weeks later, another guy would start after that. So the benefit of that is that guy at group 24, or even in the early 20s, light bulbs may have gone on. He's being accountable. He's, participating. He's seeing some great stuff. Guy that comes in at group 1 like this guy can go, hey, you know what? I've been in that seat you're sitting. I didn't want to be here either. Just give it a chance. Give it a chance. Listen to what they're saying, and maybe it'll work for you. Honestly, the group members would listen more to each other oftentimes than they would to the facilitators. That's a good group. That's what I want to happen. What I want to happen is for us to kind of, give the information we have to give, and then let the group work on its own. When you have a participant holding another one accountable, that's a peer, that's going to be more effective than me doing it. Mm-hmm. There's no shortcuts. Go ahead.
I was just going to add, what Michelle's going over here comes out in the administrative code, but remember, administrative code are minimum standards. People can choose to do better than that. So when, Michelle, you've gone back and forth a few times between 24 and 26-week programs, which is the norm, but it must be 24 weeks. If an application comes across my desk that it's a 20-week program, it cannot be approved, okay? Now, also, when we talk about dosage, a program may extend someone's time in a program because of lack of progress. That is not only acceptable, it is encouraged. Because if you haven't seen change in attitudes, beliefs, behavior, then you don't say successful discharge, right? But it should be that that person knows about an extension long before the last group, because we've been talking about it. I've been sharing with you what I think you're doing well in terms of progress, and I've been sharing with you where it's not going so well, where you're not cutting it. And so they have opportunities to change, opportunities to get more engaged, more involved in the program. So no one, again, back to that participant contract, never should be a gotcha where on week 24 you tell someone this is not your last group. Okay, they should have known about that all along.
Right, so it's ongoing conversations with that person individually. And you're exactly right. It wouldn't be fair for a PAPE program to spring that on someone. What if they're coming on their week 26 and you go, I don't think you've done enough. So I think we're going to add 10 more sessions. Why am I adding 10 more sessions? Like, there needs to be rationale behind it. You need to be talking to the individual. They need to know ahead of time. And then you also need to let the referral source know you're doing this.
Yes.
Because they're also thinking it's whatever, 24, if it's a 24-week program, or a 26-week program. So there needs to be that communication all the way around, and there needs to be justification. It can't just be a random number that you come up with for no reason whatsoever. That's punishment. That's the punishment piece.
Yep.
90 minutes minimum. Again, groups are an hour and a half, anywhere from an hour and a half minimum to 2 hours. So I used to do 2-hour groups. Sounds like a long time. It's not. So much happens in a group, and it's by like that. And I would tell participants at the beginning, I know 24 to 26 or 26 weeks sounds like a long time, because they'd be like, can I do 3 groups a week? Like, I need to get this done. Nope, you can only do once a week. But let me tell you why we do that. So it's always like, you have to be able to explain why it happens. Again, we are trying to encourage change in the participants. If we did 3 times a week, we'd be done like that. If we did online training, we wouldn't have any interaction. If we did a weekend training, what would they gain from that? Again, these are people who oftentimes are court mandated, so they don't want to be there. So you're working with that resistance from the beginning. Once you get people who are open-minded, then we've got to talk about your pattern of abusive behavior. We have to identify it. We have to challenge some of your choices, and then hopefully build some skills so that you're not going to repeat the same pattern in the future. Psychoeducational. So when I first started my very first PAPE, and it's like burned in my brain. So I'm sure that it was very well-intentioned, but it wasn't working well, and they did change it. But it was a group of, before the 15, 40, close to 40, yes, 40 individuals, and they're all men, 40 individuals, 4 facilitators. We did our group at a hospital, and it was strictly psychoeducational. We went in there, we were doing how domestic violence affects children, do your little spiel. 2 facilitators had to wake people up, other ones were reading newspapers. We had no idea what anyone was thinking, what beliefs they had. Then halfway through, so again, 2-hour group, we split, go to other rooms. That's after having a break, so then you had to get them from coming out of break, go to 2 separate rooms, 20 and 20, and try to do some of the stuff that we were going to do in an hour. It just was not effective at all. And that's why you get down to this maximum 15 participants. Even 15 is a lot in one group, because so much happens. You have to be totally on top of those people who either talk a lot or don't talk at all, right? And the ones who might want to talk, but you got to make sure that you're facilitating it so everyone gets their say in group. But it is not the strictly just, I'm giving information. It's very interactive. And interactive could mean we might show a video and have a discussion about it. We might do some role playing. So that's the skill building that we'll get to. We might do homework assignments. So a lot of programs will have homework assignments, but we also have some participants who might not write well. Like one guy would say, you know what, this is really tough for me because I don't write well. And I'm like, it's not about your writing. If you can explain it to me verbally, that's fine. That's all we need to know. What we want is the content. I don't really care if you spelled a word right, because you're going to see when I run on the board, I'm probably spelling some words wrong too. So it's not about that. It's about what is involved in that homework assignment. But homework can be very intimidating, and that's why you have to be creative with it. So, and programs do get very creative. It's not this, going back to college type thing or school type thing where we're going to be, I did work with a facilitator who did have an issue with like sentences and formation, and it was like we had to train him and say, it's not about that. It's about, give us the content. We want to know what's involved in it. Homework are usually guided with questions, and that's where it makes it a little bit easier for us to understand where they're coming from.
And homework is not a requirement. What is a requirement is that there has to be opportunities for application. Okay, so whether that be role playing, whether that be individual discussions on it, what have you, but homework is oftentimes used, but it is not a requirement. Mm-hmm. And it should never be a reason why someone is not accepted into a program because of their literacy level.
Or terminated from the program. Gender specific, Teresa already talked about this. Women are in one group, men are in another. And again, online programs, which have popped up a little bit more, right? Are not accepted in Illinois. So, participants may try, but that's not going to work. Okay, so the group content in a PAPE. Again, this is directed by the administrative code. There's no mandated curriculum, but you must have a curriculum. So there's a curriculum out there called the Duluth model. Some programs will use it. Some programs will use part of Duluth and then they'll bring some of their other stuff in it. However, in the administrative rule, we do have to address some particular topics. So some of those might be causes and forms of domestic violence. Of course, we're addressing attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors. We're always going to discuss the impact of domestic violence or their violence on their partner and their children. And that can be done in lots of different ways. And I noticed just from the time that I worked in PAPE programs that the most difficult topic they had was talking about how it affected their children. Like that's where you would see some emotion in group and some real, crying. It's hard. And then, like Teresa said, you have to have time for skill building. How do I know if the information I'm giving them, they can apply? We have to have time for them to apply it. So role playing is really good. Oftentimes they don't really love that, but that is a good way to kind of practice some of the skills. But I think group has to be creative or you're going to lose them. So, even if it's throwing, we did one thing in group where it was on sexual violence, and it was it was pretty easy. We would just basically say, stand up in the middle of the room. We put signs say agree, disagree, and not sure in the room, and we would read statements from a sheet that we had, and you had to go stand wherever you agreed, but you had to be able to justify it. So like, for example, yes or no means yes. And then wherever they went, they would have to justify it to the group. That just got them moving, number one. So they, because we did a 10 o'clock in the morning group. So that got them up and moving. It also got you to find out where belief systems were. We also said, there is no judgment here. Because I want you to be as honest as possible, and we're going to be okay with what you say. But you need to be able to justify why you're over there. So it'd be interesting the conversations that we'd have, but that's another way that you can be creative in group. And it is a way to find out belief systems that you now have to work with. Connections. So again, we talked about the different systems that we work with. PAPE cannot do this by themselves. So PAPE programs cannot be successful without these different systems, whichever ones are working. So we talked a little bit about victim service program. It's extremely important to have a relationship. They're very valuable. Some programs have those under the same roof, but I can tell you some are under the same roof and don't talk. So you really have to make an effort to have that relationship. And then probation department, substance abuse if you're working with it, mental health agencies, DCFS if they're the referral source, and then being part of the Family Violence Coordinating Council. That's really important because you get to be in a room with those other systems. And not only are you addressing the participants we see in the program, but you're addressing domestic violence as a whole. All right, so thinking about, and obviously we're not answering this, but thinking about the system you might be working in, when we think of right connections, I want you to think about kind of in your system and working with other systems, what's working well? So what do you do well? Do you have good communication? Are you always hearing from that PAPE program? Are you reaching out to them? What gaps do you have? So is there anything missing that you could identify? And then what could you be doing differently for that community coordinated response? Because when we have a community coordinated response, that's when we can address this all holistically. When I first started, I worked in a tiny PAPE program with the victim service program, but we were very separate. We were under the same roof, but we were very separate. And not with any ill intention, it was just like, that's that batterer program over there, that's that little program, but they're not doing what we're doing. Well, yes, we are. We are actually all addressing the same problem, and so when we work together, it makes it a lot more successful. Monitoring. Again, the administrative code requires that you must have these in place, so these processes in place. What that could be kind of what Teresa mentioned before. So from your referral source, what sort of information are you getting from them? Can you get a police report if that's possible? That's always helpful because that gives us kind of an idea of a snapshot of what happened. Are you doing assessments that you can share with the PAPE program? And the same for PAPE. And again, these are all with the releases of information. So with your referral source, when are we going to report to them? Are we sending them a monthly completion criteria? I know some programs do that where they, take each individual, and I used to sit down with my facilitator and we would go through, and it was different forms of accountability. How are they doing with attendance? How are they doing with, showing accountability, et cetera, on a monthly basis? Not only would that help us determine where they're at, it would make sure that we did not lose anyone in the program. If we sat down to do that report and went, oh my God, I can't remember anything that he said in the last month, we're not doing our job. So that would help us. Are we sharing that with our referral source, right? If issues come up or if a participant gets terminated, are we letting them know? When are we letting them know? Are you asking your referral source, how soon do you want to know this information? So we must have processes in place in order to monitor how all the participants doing and how we're communicating it to the referral source. Again, that goes back to the relationships that you build with not just your referral source, but systems in general.
So with that, we don't dictate what that has to look like, because in some areas they have scheduled in-person meetings on a monthly basis. Other places, like, there's no way we can do that, and they want weekly attendance forms faxed over or emailed over. So it can look different. The important part of this is, like, if I get a phone call from a court, from probation, what have you, saying our PAPE provider isn't doing anything, we don't get the reports that we need. First question I'm going to ask is, have you had that conversation with them before I have that conversation with them? But if you've had the conversation, it's still not successful, I'd ask, what is it that you're not getting that you want? Is it not often enough? Is it not thorough enough? And then I'll use some judgment to say, okay, well, it's not reasonable that someone can produce a report to you within 24 hours, and we have that. Somebody shows up, they're on the docket, I need this yesterday. Sorry, PAPEs are typically a part-time program with part-time staff, and so they may not even be working the day you're asking for it in the PAPE program. So so that's part of that, looking it through. If all you're going to look at, and I hope it's not true, but if all you're looking at is attendance, and they're filling out all this extra information that tells you about what kind of progress are they participating more in group, are they showing changes in their, are they completing assignments, etc., and all you're doing is saying, okay, they were there, well, then that's a disconnect. Either you don't know how to use that information, they're giving you too much information, or they're trying to, is there a better way to flag? Maybe you say, you know what, I can't read a 5-page narrative on everybody who comes in. I got too many people on my caseload. That's okay. So what is it you need to know? It would be more efficient if I flagged something like right at the top of the form that said, danger of termination. Bing, 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 and you go, okay, now I need to read this. I need to see what's going on. I want to even call the person instead of reading it. So, figure out what works. The requirement of the PAPE program is that they work with you, but what that looks like is going to be very different. But I encourage you, instead of, if you're in a rut where you're getting stuff that's not useful to you, have that conversation. On the other side, if you are a PAPE program and you don't get what you need to do the assessment, and the other parties have all stuff, because the person comes to you and says, I already answered that. I already told that person that. They already have a file on me on that. Why are we doing this again? Why wouldn't we share that information? So it is a two-way commitment and conversation.
So after participants are in the program, so they've been accepted in the program, there's many reasons why they might not finish. And here's the follow. So poor attendance, right off the bat, poor attendance is one. They could be terminated by court for unknown reasons. Reoffending. So if they've got a reoffense, now they're not in your program again. Lack of accountability. So again, that speaks to their progress in group. That wouldn't be something that would be one group where they're not accountable and you go, you're out.
Or the first few weeks where we don't expect them to be.
Absolutely, yeah. It's something that takes time, that you really have to monitor that progress, talk to that individual. You'd be surprised sometimes what people will tell you individually, but when they're in a group, it's a little bit more difficult. So it's really weeding that out. And then their behavior, again, if somebody has inappropriate behavior in group and it's taking away from the rest of the group, and honestly, how are they benefiting from group? Then they might get terminated.
So that what I want to point out, looking at statewide statistics, every PAPE program does an annual service report. It comes into me on August 15th, or at least by August 15th every year. And those reasons that Michelle had up there on the screen, that is tracked, okay? So one of the things, if I look at it on a statewide basis, the number one time where poor attendance kind of springs up is in between assessment and first group. That's a huge drop. We're talking to programs, here's the likely scenario. They entered late into their mandatory time, whether that be probation, child welfare, etc. So they come in last minute, they do an assessment, they bring the assessment, they show the referral source, show the judge, show the DCFS worker, etc. Look, I did it. The pressure's off, and we don't hear from them again. Or they've done that scenario early on, and so, you know, then they let 6 months go by because no one has checked on them. No one has given any follow-up information to you. And so we do that again in 6 months. They show up one time, get the pressure off, maybe 2 times, and then they don't show up again. That is the big attendance problem. It isn't somebody who's gone 20 weeks and never shows up again. It really is that, you know, reason why I really stress consequences, communication, collaboration as soon as there's a misfire. As soon as there's a disconnect in the program, wrap around that to help that person be successful. Okay. So, as it was said, that sanctions must be immediate responses to infractions by restricting the offender's freedom and redirecting behavior. So getting on it right away makes all the difference in the world. We think they can be successful, but oftentimes they need our support to do that.
And what what we used to say off the bat, you will get out of this program what you put into it, right? Mm-hmm. I can't make you change. No one can make you change. Only you can decide to make that change. But we're here to help you make that change. So it's being supportive in the motivation to make that change. But again, it all falls on them, right? It's participant dependent. It's, the information that they provide to us is what we have to work with. Mm-hmm. But it's mm-hmm.
And so when we look at consequences, probably one of the most important things is that it's swift, it happens right away, not way down the road. It's certain. It isn't like, well, Michelle's in a bad mood, therefore I'm not going to get away with this tonight. Or my probation officer likes me, so, I know I can get away with this. That it is certain. It doesn't have to be a huge consequence. It doesn't have to be, it's kind of like if you're a parent and you've done you're grounded till you're 30. And after 2 days of your teenager being grounded, you've had enough, whether they have or not, doesn't matter. You put consequences that were so extreme that it really, you're not going to use it because you find it a punishment. So when it comes to consequences, I'm not advocating for these really high-end interventions. Sometimes just knowing it's going to happen for sure. I don't have a doubt that if I don't show up, something's going to happen. I'm going to have that conversation. I'm going to have another group tacked on. I'm going to have to, whatever it may be, okay? And it's meaningful. So, some of the things that we look for, and this you'll see throughout a participant contract, what we mean by accountability, because that's kind of a big term. What does that mean? Does that mean that, does it mean victim blaming? Like if I said it was my partner's fault because, if dinner had only been on the table at 5 o'clock like I asked, I work hard all day. It ought to be there when I get back. Okay, when I hear those types of things, I'm saying the person's not being accountable. If I hear things from a participant like it's that judge, it's that law enforcement officer, mm-hmm. it's that whatever, that's the reason I'm here, they're not being accountable. It's all sorts of things like that. And so I want to see a demonstration. And that's even more than talking. What am I seeing in group? Are they mentoring some of the newer ones that have come in? And that is the way that almost every single group in Illinois is an open-ended group. The good news about that is there's no wait list. Think about those areas of the state where I told you they have one group that they offer once a week. Well, what if you we're on group 3 and now you're referred? You got to wait almost 5 months to start it. Now, it is a good idea, it's allowable, that if somebody, like if you have themes, we're doing impact on children. Well, I don't want someone to come in on week 3 of impact on children. Let's wait till we get to the next theme and then have them come in. That's a good way to do that as well. But open programs are very important because otherwise we can't respond to your needs and then we're not given the right timing as a PAPE program. Okay? I already mentioned about the extending time in a program is allowable and it's recommended if we're not seeing progress. So, right combinations. Could be that someone comes in and PAPE was court ordered. PAPE is the only thing that the person needs. We do the screening for mental health, nothing shows up. We do a screening for substance abuse, nothing comes up that requires a referral or speaks to the need for a referral. Then later on, so we're going to start that person in PAPE. And they're going to be going down the path of PAPE. But as they come to group, maybe they share something, or maybe we observe some behavior that makes us concerned about it, or maybe someone just doesn't seem stable. You know, we might make a referral at that point. Doesn't mean we'd pull them out of PAPE. If they can still benefit from group, and other people can still benefit with them in the group, then we would just add that on. So that might mean you need to be open and receptive to a conversation that says, will you support my recommendation for this add-on intervention? It's not on the court order, but we consider it a part of PAPE. In the requirements, it says, you know, completion of PAPE and any other services recommended. And that might be mental health or substance abuse treatment. Okay? So we're not considering them done with our program if those are things that need to be done as well, because we don't think they'll be successful. And again, it's not because mental illness causes intimate partner violence. It's not because substance use causes it. But if we know, that would be like someone in group where we observed where they were, they had what seemed to be a health problem. And we said, well, you know, that's not my business. I'm not in PAPE, but maybe I happen to be knowledgeable about this particular condition. Would I not recommend to that person, would I not address it, considering my business, to say, hey, I'm concerned about you. Have you thought about this? We have some fine programs that help people with employment, that help them deal with anxiety, that help them deal with things that are beyond the scope of PAPE because their agency offers a wider lens of services, or they have a partnership with it.
I just wanted to touch on substance abuse. So say, you know, you do a group 10 o'clock in the morning, you've assessed an intake, they don't have any substance abuse needs, but then week 10, they show up totally intoxicated. Now, it doesn't make sense to have that person in group because what are they going to get from the group? They're intoxicated. But that tells me there's another problem if you're coming to us and you know you're intoxicated to group. So that would be a time to contact a referral source and then determine whether they need to go for an assessment and then whether that treatment can happen before they come back or can it happen at the same time? But that's like a warning sign. It's like a red flag.
Yep. And every program, when an application, so even though with the number, sometimes people hear me say, well, it's about 75. That's because it's a moving number. I have an application for a program in Southern Illinois right now, which I'm so excited about because we don't have enough PAPE programs in Southern Illinois. And they could be approved. So they might be added to the list in the next couple of weeks. But that number changes. But all of them, when they send in an application, they must have policies and procedures that address every section of the administrative code. So the example that Michelle just gave about someone coming up under the influence, having a policy that says we will not allow someone to stay in our group if they're under the influence is not enough. Because if you happen to be one of our agencies that is primarily a substance abuse treatment agency, the resources that they have at their disposal, including a detox unit, is very different than a victim service agency that also offers PAPE, but they offer it out, off-site in a community room in the library. Well, how you handle that person showing up to group would be different than in Winnebago County, where they have one of their programs, their group is held in the county building where probation is. All different ways of doing it. So that's where they would have to spell out when someone comes in, like for example, do you take the keys away? Do you have in your files who their emergency medical contact is so you could contact that person to come and safely get them home? Do you call a cab? Do you have an agreement with a cab company that will facilitate that so no one is in danger? Remember, we care about who's in group. It's not just about having them complete the program. We want to make sure they're safe and they change. So if I have somebody in my lab who is too intoxicated for group, it's beyond, you can't come through the doors to my group program. I want to make sure that you are safe, okay? So that's part of it. So why is it not anger management? Because that's one of those things that oftentimes is the biggest mistaken referral.
Right. And you have a handout in your blue folder that you can look at later, but it talks about the differences between anger management and PAPE, and I'm going to go over those pretty quickly. So anger management's great. It's just not a great fit for anyone who's been abusive. And there's lots of reasons why. So PAPE programs are 24 to 26 weeks. Again, we're addressing the attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors. You can't do that in an anger management program because they're not going to address attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors. They're going to address the anger issue, right? They're also shorter. So anywhere from, I don't know what they are now, but like I know they're much shorter than a PAPE program, 10 to 12 weeks maybe. They're not regulated. PAPE programs are regulated by Department of Human Services. Like Teresa said, she comes in, she does site visits. Not only does she look at records that you're keeping, she observes a group. So there's that real oversight. And again, how she said it was a perfect approach. Like you think of site visits and you get, I used to get kind of nervous. And she would come in and it was more like, a teaching moment. It wasn't, you're doing this wrong. It's, you should maybe think about this differently and how could you do this differently? Anger management programs are focused on the anger, kind of the losing it, where PAPE programs are focused on patterns of abusive behavior. And we start that language and that talking about patterns of behavior right at the beginning so that participants in the program know that it's a pattern and not something that just happens, because they will come in and say, I just lost it. And then when we take a closer look and break it all down, you can see that there are many opportunities they had to do something differently. Victim safety is not a primary concern of anger management, but it is in PAPE programs. That's like one of the number one concerns. And they don't focus on accountability. They focus more on skills. So think about things like counting to 10. Timeouts are used in anger management, and timeouts can be used in PAPE programs too. They're not anger management programs, but we might use that as one of the skills that we might teach, but it's teeny tiny. It's just one of the many skills that they learn. Quickly, we kind of talked about this before, but system coordination. So again, this is what PAPE programs need to do when they're working with the other systems. They could participate in DV committees, so making sure that they have a presence because we're all addressing the same goal. Being part of that coordinated community response. If we're all working together for the same issue, there will be better results, but also evaluating it. How's it working? How's it not working? What do we need to be doing differently? And our policies and procedures. Like way back in the day, programs didn't have to have policies and procedures for every little thing. So what would happen is you would have a policy up here. And then the staff person would leave and then it'd be like, well, what? Here's the binder of the curriculum, but what policy? It's really important to have those policies and procedures and to not only just have them once, but reevaluate them to know if they're working effectively. So these are all the systems that we know make a difference. They make a difference in lives of victims of domestic violence as well as the participants we see in the program. So we listed some of them and we left one open, just kind of letting you think of what's missing up there for you. So these are the 4 things that make intervention successful that we've talked about. Timing is really important. Accountability, that runs throughout the entire PAPE program. Monitoring, so we need to make sure we're monitoring the progress in the programs and also communicating that with our referral sources, and then the consequences that we issue, making sure that we're being consistent, making sure that we're communicating with our referral sources about what the consequences may include.
So I want to pause and see, everyone had the opportunity to write down questions. I'm not sure if we received any questions.
Right there.
You don't have any? Okay, all right. We are covering everything you want. Huh? That's awesome.
Great.
we've mentioned the administrative code. Feel free to look that up and see exactly, because that is really the guidance. You know, I can't go into a program and say, I don't like the way you do that, and write them up unless I have some basis in the code to do so. I can give recommendations, I can give suggestions, but to actually require a corrective action plan, or in extreme cases, and this really has been extreme, where I have immediately taken someone off of the DHS approved program. I have had that happen when I showed up for a site visit and something what I would consider an egregious violation of the administrative code that jeopardized safety. Then they had 1 week to respond and to remedy, or they were closed down. They did not remedy, and so they were taken off the approved list and eventually had to shut their doors, because I notified the court system, I notified child welfare, all their mandatory referrals, that they were no longer approved and that there were serious violations. So we you know, that doesn't happen. That's once where that has happened, and I've been in this role for, I don't know, 15 years or so with the state. So we don't want that to happen. My idea, as I said, with the site visits is to give technical assistance, to give support so folks can do better.
So we have 3 questions. I'm going to give you one card so you can look at 2. But the first one, it's a good one, and Teresa, you might know a little bit more of this, but I can tell you my experience. So does insurance cover domestic violence programs? Well, a lot of times, you would need a diagnosis with that. We don't diagnose. We don't give a diagnosis in PAPE programs. And for insurance, I mean, guys would often ask that, and I would say, you could try to submit this to insurance, and I've never seen it covered. I don't know if you have, but I've not seen it covered.
I have, but the problem with that, when I have challenged an agency, and I've seen that, now I'm not the Medicaid police or the you know, whatever private insurance police, but where I would come from is a programmatic piece of perspective. And so when I saw in an agency, I said, okay, so you build it. Let me see, what diagnosis did you give? And they give intermittent explosive disorder. Okay, let's put that up against what we learned already about right fit. Is that a right fit for PAPE? No. Is that a right fit for mental health services? Quite possibly. Is that potentially a right fit for anger management? Quite possibly. So these are, you know, probable. This is a no way. Okay? So in that essence, that's where I can come in and have some authority to respond to that, saying what you are saying is the issue does not meet the scope of PAPE. Okay? Was that, did you have another one?
Nope. Well, I have 2 more, but go ahead.
Okay, so I had one asking about, or bringing up the issue of, you know, expanding upon PAPE not being a punishment. And so oftentimes, because of the length of the program, of course, if I had if I had to pay for it, because that's an issue, let's just own it, right? So if I had to pay for a 10-week program or a 5-week program versus a 24 or 26-week program, and I'm the public defender, or I'm the person that's trying to figure out how to move all this through the system, would it not be inviting to look at, you know, some type of plea bargain or some type of lesser thing so they can get through the system, they can complete? And my response to that is, one, there are 2 different things. That would be a great response if what the person really needed was anger management, because they're not the primary aggressor in an intimate partner relationship. But since PAPE isn't punishment, it's about, and neither is anger management. Both should be designed for facilitating change, for building skills. So, so no, in that case, it's the wrong fit. So it's not the right intervention. And if we can agree that neither are viewed or should be used as punishment, then entering that into a plea bargain isn't something that I would recommend be on the table. The other question or comment is about, I mentioned the exclusion criteria, when somebody wouldn't be eligible for PAPE. And so the question or comment was around, would PAPEs provide that information or explanation as to why they're not eligible? Yes, yes, absolutely yes. If you are not getting that information, ask for it. If you've asked for it and you don't get it, then you can share your dissatisfaction with that PAPE program, or you can contact me, because they should be sharing that, because you made the referral. Now, of course, there has to be a release of information in place, because someone is court ordered does not give the PAPE program the authority to violate the Illinois Mental Health Developmental Disability Confidentiality Code. That is what they are under. Okay, so that might be the issue. But if they're giving you any paperwork, then it might be that they're either the release has expired, or in the release of information, they only check the box that was on attendance for, attendance level, not more information that can be exchanged. So I would say, again, try to solve it on the local level, but if that doesn't happen, you should know, because this is not not a PAPE client, let me wash my hands of that. No, they're not eligible for me, and here's why not, and here's what I recommend for this individual.
Mm-hmm. Is there a list of PAPE programs? So yes, there is on the DHS homepage. There is a office locator that you can put in zip code.
Well, you can put in first type of program in first, and then you put location. And so type of program would be partner abuse intervention program, but know when you go to that directory, it also has our domestic violence victim service programs, it has the rape crisis centers, it has mental health programs, it has WIC programs, child care referral and resource centers. It's really the whole laundry list of DHS programs. So you can pick the type of program, you can do all, which means you're going to get all of them in the state alphabetical, or you can list by county. The one thing I will tell you about Cook County, I have chosen not to put it in there by zip code. The reason being is, anybody can go to any program. If I want to drive from Cairo to come to a Cook County Monday night group, I could do that. But maybe I live in Southern Illinois or Central Illinois, and my job is this way, which I work Monday through Friday, and then I return on weekends. So that's why we don't have those kind of service areas, because we don't, even the funded programs, we don't fund them by service area. Okay? We fund them for the service, whomever it is that may come there. Okay? So if you're wanting to look for Cook County, please do not put in a zip code, because you'll probably get a 0 response, and there's 31. So that means there's something amiss.
Here, I'm going to give you this one. But
okay.
Should mental health treatment come first? It's a lifelong problem, so how do you determine? That would be in your intake assessment. That would not keep someone from attending PAPE. I think it's a conversation you have with the individual. It depends on the severity. It depends on how stable they are. But if they're stable enough, they can absolutely participate in the group. It's not anything that's going to be revealed in group unless that participant decides to reveal it on their own. But that would not keep them from coming to group.
Right. So again, it goes back to benefit.
Assessment. Yes,
can
absolutely.
the individual benefit?
Can they benefit from group? The other one is a PAPE program appropriate or truly beneficial for mentally ill adults who are abusing parents or siblings? So again, we're talking about intimate partner violence. So definitely this would happen in the assessment. You have to determine if they could benefit from the program and if there's any intimate partner violence in their history. So there would have to be that to make them appropriate for the group.
So this question, my first question, comes up fairly often. Of those, what do we do with those relationships where there appears to be mutual violence? Okay. Again, we would go back to the original assessment and to determine whether they would benefit from the group experience or from the PAPE program. And you're right, sometimes it does appear to be mutually violent. So we see that, not to cast a small circle, but it seems like our younger relationships, where there seems that is a much more difficult group to discern who is the primary aggressor and who isn't. And so I don't have an answer that says, would we disallow someone if there's mutual violence? I mean, typically we go back to, even when in the case where both partners use violence, there's typically someone who takes the lead. There's someone who is more afraid of the other. There's someone who's using violence for a reason that matches up with intimate partner violence, that power and control. Okay? Are groups for women different? Yes. If you're familiar with the power and control wheel, the Duluth model that's used, there is a segment of that talks about male privilege. And actually, if you pull out the male and just look at privilege, that can pertain to a lot of people. Remember at the very beginning of our time together, I talked about individuals with disabilities being at a much greater risk of violence. Well, privilege in that case can be ability. right? Things that I can do. I can take your walker and put it across the room, or your mobility device across the room, and you can't get to it. That's my privilege. I don't need that type of support. So privilege can play out in a different way. And so when we have a women's group, we're going to look at some of those dynamics and how they might be different. But in terms of the requirements with the length of time, the dosage, all of that, that is similar. Okay? Now, when people send in applications and they're saying, and we only have one group currently in the state of Illinois, one agency, not one group, that serves females only. Okay? And that came out of a community response. There was an agency, a PAPE program that well established for many, many years that only served males. And then the courts were like, well, we have some females that we think, should be in this program. And they discovered a need. And that agency that did the males did not want to offer a females group. So they partnered with someone else to help them get started to do the female group. And that's all they do. So I love it when I hear things like that it isn't a competition. It's not turf issues. It's just what's the need and who's in the best position to do that. Okay?
Is there another one?
Okay. And then there is
Are there groups that are offered in other languages? That same list that Teresa was talking about before, there is indications on there whether they be
what language,
Spanish,
whether they're
Polish.
same-sex or women's groups, men's groups, adolescent, all of that information is on that locator. Look in the description and it'll pop up there for you, okay? Yeah, so that's it. And then there was a last question about whether it's a conscious use of power and control. Conscious in the fact that it's intentional, but maybe not to where they've thought about it. That's what part of the discovering group is. That sense of entitlement, that, expectations for their partner that are totally unrealistic. I've done things in a group where we've talked about just the division of, quote, chores or responsibilities around the house, and it has very much turned out to be what appears to be a traditional female, chores and traditional males. And they said, well, are you saying that we can't divide our tasks? I said, no. If it's a we that came up with those decisions, awesome, But if it's I told my partner this is what they need to do because women, do dishes and men take out garbage or what, then that's where the issue comes in, okay? So, but they didn't think about that because maybe they were the kid who took out trash and never touched the dishes because mom was the one that did that, So it helps them reevaluate some of that. So just this last teaser, and Michelle brought this up with a think about, are you happy with where things are at? Are you communicating? Are you getting the information you need? Are you quick to jump into consequences so you have that swift, meaningful, consistent response? Here, and what I did was just take the order of protection and look at why we have those remedies. Some of this we've gone over before, and I think the informed decision making really highlights why we need to share information. If we're doing an assessment on someone who says, I haven't ever done anything, it makes it really difficult to figure out what their needs are and what programming is appropriate. It's very difficult if judges don't have the information they need in order to process a case. So, we should all be sharing that. So when someone shows up for a status hearing, PAPE providers have got to have that information to you on time in order to do that, okay? Again, all of this we've talked about. The technology systems, there is a court in Illinois that they have their PAPE providers load all their information into a county database, and so everybody is spot on, timely with, I know exactly, who showed up to group last week, et cetera. They've done a lot of work with their legal folks, with their IT folks to make that happen, and if anyone's interested in seeing if that's doable, I'd be more than happy to share the contact information. This is stuff we already went over in terms of the response or the consequences. And if you look at an order of protection, these are kind of what we have at our disposal, that a victim may choose to ask for remedies that have to do around economics, around children, around property. All of these things really reflect the tactics that are used, right? Maybe what I do is I withhold child support, or I give an allowance to my partner, or I ruin my partner's credit.
Or I sabotage her getting a driver's license, or I sabotage her getting a job, or it could be lots of different.
Right. So when you have someone requesting a remedy, or you're helping a victim navigate the system, or you're some piece of this puzzle, think about every remedy that's on there is reflective of one of those intentional, goal-oriented tactics. So it isn't just about because I may say, I want to continue the relationship. Well, then the remedy around personal protection is going to look very different than a victim that says, I'm done. I feel so unsafe, this is what I need. So every remedy is very specific because the abuse that is used is victim specific. I can tell you when, I'll leave it with the example of the intentionality. You know, if my partner, let's say I got a job interview tomorrow morning, and so my partner does not want me to go to that job. You know, he thinks I'm thinking I'm all that, right? So you are not going to that interview. And just to ensure that I don't go to that interview, or I be so foolish to go against what he said and show up for that interview, I'm not going to get that job. Where is he going to strike me? Where are my injuries going to be? Visible, right? It's going to be in my face. It's going to be very obvious, right? But let's say the message instead is, okay, I want you to get that job because, you know, I want the money and I don't want to work. But don't you forget who's in charge here. Where are my injuries going to be?
Stomach.
Right? Right? Where they can't be seen. Now you tell me how I lost it. I was so angry fits into that. If I can intentionally decide where I'm going to hurt you. Case made. So each one of these, again, you know, thinking about what tactic is used, listening to the voice of the victim that says, this is what I know he will do. You know, it's real easy because some of us may have at some time used a phrase like, oh, if I do that, he'll kill me, or if I do that, she'll do what, you know, and we say it like so, you know, casual. If a victim looks at you and says, I can't do that, and maybe it's something they're mandated by the courts to do, for some other crime, for some, you know, I can't do that or he'll kill me. Take it seriously. Listen to their needs around personal protection. Listen to why property is being used as a way to control, and what might you offer as a remedy in order to lessen that control. With restrictions, you know, think about what access the person may have to sabotage. You think you're all that, you don't get to go to school. You don't get a job. All of these things that you see in a remedy are tactics and what you can do to minimize the tactics being used against them.
Well, thank you very much for your participation today. And thank you, Teresa. Thank you, Michelle. And if you have any question, you can leave the question and we'll make sure that you get an answer through the email. And also don't forget to fill up the information about this program, this presentation. And thank you very much. And thank you for the judges present today. Honorable Stephanie Saltor, thank you for the opportunity to be here. I want to acknowledge Honorable Samuel Vitor here from Rolling Meadows, and also Honorable Ketzi Stephen from Rolling Meadows Courthouse as well. Thank you for your attention, and have a nice day.
And my contact information is on the last page of your PowerPoint. Please reach out to me if I can be of assistance in any way.
And all the attorneys, their CLE, make sure you sign up.
You're welcome, of
Oh, you're welcome.
course.